Welcome to the Occupy Wall Street teach-in here at Smith College. I'm really glad that you all made it out here today. I'm just going to intro by talking a little bit about what is Occupy Wall Street, where did it come from, what is this movement that we keep talking about, and then we're going to move into a panel discussion. We have 6 great panelists here today, and I hope that you get a lot out of this and join our small group discussions afterwards. And I'll present those again at the end. But anyway, Occupy Wall Street. What in the world is going on? For nearly 2 months, people have gathered in a park within the center of Manhattan's financial district. The demands and issues discussed are many, and Occupy movements continue to expand across the country and across the globe. The Occupy Wall Street protesters come from a wide range of movements, with strong and visible representation of class activists, labor movement activists, environmental activists, immigrant rights activists, anti-racist activists, LGBTQ activists, feminist activists, and universal healthcare activists, just to name a few. The protesters come from all walks of life, from young college students to those who have been working on social justice issues for decades. For this reason, some people have called Occupy Wall Street the movement of movements. The protest camp has become a place where people can meet to educate one another, to uncover their similar needs and issues, and to mobilize. From this process, common goals have been identified, and a declaration of the occupation has been approved by the General Assembly. Fundamental to all the diverse issues is the fact that, as stated in the declaration, we live in a time when corporations, which place profit over people, self-interest over justice, and oppression over equality, run our governments. The main point is clear. With corporate control of the political process, there can be no democracy. And from this injustice stem the innumerable issues that plague our nation and the world. Oh, no. Within this issue, and central to the movement, is the goal of holding executives responsible for the practices that contributed to the current economic crisis, and address the problem of the outrageous disparity in wealth, where the top 1% of Americans own 35% of the wealth, and the bottom 40% own 0.3%. This has become the rallying cry of the movement. We are the 99%. So how did this all begin? There are 2 parallel stories here. The birth of the movement is usually attributed to a call to action put forth by Adbusters, an anti-capitalist magazine from Canada, which also distributed the now iconic image of the dancer on the bull. Adbusters called for a march of over 90,000 people to fill Lower Manhattan in order to culture jam the financial district with the very bodies that had been displaced from that space. This drew the crowd that would form the original occupation. However, Occupy Wall Street would not be what it is today if it were not for another important group. Known as the 16 Beaver Street Group, named for the place where they had their meetings, this group was comprised of organizers, some from New York, including people who had just come from Bloombergville, and some abroad, notably including Egyptians who had participated in the Arab Spring Uprising and Spaniards from the Spanish Liberation. This group was paramount in the forming of the General Assembly. The 2 groups merged together, both setting their sights for September 17th, providing an active, engaged populace with a non-hierarchical direct democracy. And so the settlement of Liberty Plaza and Occupy Wall Street as we know it was born, fed and sustained by the fervor of the many organizations that came before it. The movement has been highly criticized for not having one direct vision and purpose. There is no one particular corporate action being criticized, no one bill being pushed forth. Yet to say that the movement has no demands is entirely missing the point. People come to Occupy Wall Street with concrete outcomes they want to see happen. In economic justice, in food justice, in campaign finance reform, in advocating for homeless queer youth. The movement reflects a tiredness with single-issue activism and seeks the critical connections between these diverse demands, highlighting large-scale structural and institutional problems that cannot be resolved by a single policy change. Despite these strong voices, what appears on the media is a nebulous, unorganized mass of young people and hippies attending a carnival, aimless and unsustainable. But when you look past what is shown in the general media, the occupation is highly organized. My last check of the General Assembly website revealed over 80 different working groups in New York City alone. Many of these groups work within the encampment itself, which has become a microcosm of what participants would like to see in a just society. In Liberty Plaza is a kitchen that serves all protesters 3 meals a day. There's also a medical center staffed by volunteer doctors, nurses, and medics. There's a library packed with donated books to help educate participants on any issue related to the movement. There's a comfort station, which receives and distributes donations, including tarps, blankets, and warm clothes. Finally, there's a sanitation team, which picks up trash and recyclables, attempting to maintain cleanliness in a small space overflowing with people. When Mayor Bloomberg attempted to remove protesters from the park, citing that it needed to be cleaned, the sanitation group proved that they could do it themselves. Beyond the working groups that maintain the living conditions within the park, there are many others that are continuously meeting to promote the movement itself. Working groups include direct action groups, which organize marches and specific protests, as well as organize teach-ins and lectures. There is also a media and information working group, which publishes the Occupy Wall Street Journal, which is also published in Spanish, thanks to the Spanish translation working group. There's also a very visible working group dedicated to arts and culture, which provides materials for sign making and artistic expression related to the movement. Nevertheless, Occupy Wall Street is not a perfect movement, and it has received very astute criticisms about its claimed inclusivity, especially regarding issues such as race and gender, and the use of the term occupy for what are essentially already occupied indigenous lands. These issues have been the topic of several General Assemblies and the mission of several working groups. These pointed criticisms help make the movement stronger. For instance, terms like decolonize and unoccupy are increasingly in use, and it has allowed for a larger discussion on the ways in which colonial and neo-colonial issues also lie at the heart of Occupy Wall Street. We must remember that if this movement is classist, if it is racist, if it is sexist, it is because our current society is still classist, racist, and sexist. This is not to apologize for these injustices, but to remind us of how much we are still fighting against. These are not issues that are being ignored. These are issues that are actively being addressed in very public spaces. Occupy Wall Street has also drawn much media attention because of the police brutality that has marked the predominantly nonviolent movement. It began with pepper spray and mass arrests, including the 700 protesters arrested for marching on the Brooklyn Bridge. But it has escalated to the warlike images that emerged from Occupy Oakland, where a Marine sustained a head wound from a police projectile, landing him in intensive care. Yet here too, we cannot imagine that this police brutality emerged suddenly out of a vacuum, as minority populations know too well. Though this brutality has long been the lived reality of many minority demographics, including communities of color and people with deviant sexual orientation and gender identity. And while people in these communities have been organizing around these issues long before Occupy Wall Street, this brutality is finally getting airtime. It is finally being made public. As hundreds of cities around the world began organizing their own occupations, it is also important to remember that this was from its inception an international movement. The movement shares much of its mission and structure with Spanish liberation, and it bases itself off the Arab Spring protest, using similar nonviolent tactics and use of social media. In a recent solidarity letter from Cairo, which I encourage you all to read, it's amazing, our comrades write, "An entire generation across the globe has grown up realizing, rationally and emotionally, that we have no future in the current order of things. Living under structural adjustment policies and the supposed expertise of international organizations like the World Bank and IMF, we watched as our resources, industries, and public services were sold off and dismantled as the free market pushed an addiction to foreign goods, to foreign food even. The profits and benefits of those free markets went elsewhere, while Egypt and other countries in the South found their immiseration reinforced by a massive increase in police repression and torture. For a school that prides itself in global engagement, it is now time for Smith College to step up. In hosting this teach-in, we hope to spread awareness and increase dialogue on the issues at the forefront of Occupy Wall Street, a movement which is only the most recent incarnation of the myriad organizations that have been raising these issues for decades. At the end of this panel, it is our hope that you will stay and join one of 4 discussion groups on campus activism, community activism, Occupy Wall Street, or a continued discussion of the issues presented. Even after this teach-in, talk to each other. Discuss what you've learned here and in your lives, and listen. The movement is a conversation. Occupy your mind. So get your notebooks out and enjoy the panel. Our first speaker this afternoon is Gerald Friedman from the Department of Economics at UMass Amherst.